So what are loops in JavaScript? Let's use our previous example that we used in arrays video. Imagine you have to write the same line of code 100 times by hand. So in our previous example, we said if we have like 100 variables, how we are going to remember that? And if we have to print all of them, we will have to write their names one by one. So loops exist so you never have to write things manually. Today we will talk about every major type of loop in JavaScript and in general, and when to reach out for one loop over the other, and the two keywords that let you control them during the execution. So our first loop is the for loop. The for loop is the most common and the most precise one, and it is a great way to repeat something for a known number of times. Now what does that mean? Let's look at the syntax and understand it. So how you write the for loop is you use the keyword for, then the open and close parentheses, and followed by its body. Now inside these parentheses, the first thing you give is the starting point. So where we are going to start. So we are going to print numbers from 0 to 4. And for that we are starting from number 0. This is our starting point. And then we have the stopping condition. So we want to print from 0 to 4. So I'm going to say I less than 5. And then what should happen every time one iteration is complete? One iteration means all the block code written inside these curly braces is completed. What should happen next? So I would increment I. Now here let's do console log, and we will say console log I. And if I go back to the browser, you can see we are printing values from 0 to 4. So for loop is the most basic one. Just three parts that you need to remember. The first part is the starting condition. The second part is the stopping condition. And the third part is what should happen at each round end. So each iteration end. Now let's talk about another loop. And we will try to do the same things but using a different loop, which is called while loop. Now a while loop is simpler. It just keeps going as long as a condition stays true. It is the right choice when you don't know in advance exactly how many times you will loop. Like in our for loop example, we knew we need to print from 0 to 4. But in case of while loop, we don't have the condition in the parentheses. So how we write a while loop is, let's say we have a counter variable and we want to do the same thing, print values from 0 to 4. Now the while loop syntax looks like this. So we have while, the keyword, the parentheses, and the body of the loop. Let me zoom in further. Now inside these parentheses is the condition, like what should be the condition this loop should keep executing. And I want if the counter is less than 5, then we will continue. So there is one difference you can see in while and for loop. In for loop we had the condition and the increment at the top, but in while loop the increment is going to be inside the body. So we have to make sure manually that we increment the counter every time, otherwise it will keep on running because counter will stay 0. So if I just write console log here, this will keep on running forever because counter is never changing and it is always going to be 0, which is always less than 5. So we need to have a condition here. Let me add counter ++ here, and for a second let me comment this out. Let's go back to the browser and see the result right now. If I press refresh, you can see it is going unlimited time and it breaks our application. Now if I add this condition back and go back to the browser and refresh, you can see we get back the result. So this is the while loop. And one thing you must be aware of, if you forget to change the condition or update the condition inside the loop, it will never stop and it will break your application. So be careful. Now we have our next loop, which is called do while loop. And you can say it is a close cousin of while with one key difference. It runs the code block first and then checks the condition. Now the syntax for this is you write do, then the body of the loop, and then you have the condition here. So counter less than 5. Now if I execute this code in the browser, you can see we still get back the same result. Now the only difference you need to be aware of between do while and while is that in do while the body is executed at least once, even though if the condition fails. So even if I say counter less than 0, which is false, and I hit refresh, I can still see 0 because this body is executed already and then the condition is being checked. So this is the difference between while and do while. So we use do while where we know we have to run the code at least once. Now for, while and do while, these are general programming loops which are available in every programming language. Now let's talk about two different loops that we have specific to JavaScript. Now let's talk about for or first. When you specifically want to loop through every item in the array, for of reads more naturally than tracking an index yourself. We can do this using the for loop as well, but for of is a more JavaScript way of doing things. Now let's say I have this array and I want to loop through this array. What I can do is write for, which is similar to what we have normally, but inside parentheses is where things change. Now here we are gonna say let fruit of, this is where the for of comes from, fruits, and I'm just going to simply console log fruit. Going back to the browser, you can see the result, apple, banana, cherry. So this is the for of loop which is used on arrays, and you can see it is quite readable and it just gives you each of the value in the array directly one at a time. Now let's talk about for in loop, and for this I'm going to write this line of code. So for in loop looks similar to for of but does something different. The for in loop loops through the keys of an object, and this is the important part, the keys of an object, not values in the array. So we have the object here, and in order to get the keys, so what I can do is write for, the similar syntax we have for of, and inside the parentheses let key in. So this is where the for in comes from, and what is the object name? User. Now if I do console log here and go back to the browser, you can see the keys of the object, name and age. Now this is very powerful because most of the time we want to use the key. For example, we need to access the value at this key in the object, so we can use this, and you can see we are using the bracket notation here. This is what I meant in the objects video. In case we have our key stored inside a variable, we have to use the bracket notation. Now if I go back to the browser and refresh, you can see I get back my key and the value. So let's summarize. For of is used for when we are working with arrays and its values, and for in is used for objects and its keys. Now let's look at two keywords that let you change a loop's behavior during the execution. So the first one is called break and the second one is called continue. Now the break basically stops the loop completely right where you are. So for example, we have this for loop, and after the console log I add the break statement. Now what do you think is going to happen? Let's go back to the browser, refresh, and you can only see 0, which is actually correct, because what it does is it's gonna console log the value of I and then break the loop. It won't go to the next iteration if we have break here. Let's take a look at continue as well. So for this I have this another for loop which loops through 0 to 10, and it finds out the odd numbers that are between 1 and 10. If the number divided by 2 and its remainder is equal to 0, that is an even number. So in that case we would just skip the console log. If it is not divisible by 2, then we print the number, because that is our odd number. So if I run this code in the browser, you can see we get back all the odd numbers between 1 to 10. Now that is all for loops for now, and let's take a deeper look at how loops actually work and how they move to the next iteration. For most people it may not be a beginner or a fundamental thing to talk about, But imagine if you are giving an interview and the interviewer asks how a loop works in JavaScript. If you are able to explain that, imagine your impact on the interviewer. And I think how the industry is changing, one must know how things work under the hood. So let's talk about something called iterators and generators.